all but confirmed today that Labor is indeed breaking its solemn pledge, repeated over 100 times before the election, to keep the Stage 3 tax cuts as legislated. Legislation, of course, that Labor voted for, and a promise they took to 2 federal elections.
Labor will support all of the legislated tax cuts which are in place now. Of course, tax cuts were legislated earlier on in this term, and we've said that we won't seek to change those legislated tax cuts.
And I've said on the Stage 3 tax cuts that they've been legislated. People are entitled to operate on the basis of that certainty.
As a result of this broken promise, taxpayers on $45,000 a year will be $804 better off, and taxpayers on $200,000 a year will be $4,500 worse off. But fiddling with these tax cuts, as Labor now plans to do, means 1.5 million Australians will be hit with bracket creep over the next decade that this tax reform was meant to fix. And let's not forget that some in the media seem to have forgotten this. These tax cuts are not the government giving us its money from government coffers. This is the government not taking so much of our money out of our pockets in the first place. It's not the government being generous to us, it's the government getting its hand out of our pocket at least a little. Now, if these Stage 3 tax cuts are wrong in principle now, why weren't they wrong in principle then, when Labor supported them, when they voted for them, and when they took them to 2 elections? Now, there are 2 massive problems here for Labor. The first, there's the broken promise. And governments shouldn't make promises they never intend to keep, especially when they're also pledging to restore integrity in government. So this broken promise looks like hypocrisy as well as a breach of faith. Second, there's the rollback of one of the few genuine economic reforms of the past decade. The Morrison government's change to a flatter tax system, one that incentivises people who want to work hard and get ahead. And then there's 2 further points. Because the government could, with its surprise surplus, have made the tax cuts for lower income earners bigger without breaking its promise to those on higher incomes. But because they're doing it anyway, this looks like a measure of class war envy. So much for another one of the PM's pre-election commitments, that he said he'd matured on from his days when he was a "I hate Tories" undergraduate lefty. As well, most of the losers from this change will be in the teal seats, who now have a reason to feel ripped off by the Albanese government. And people in these rich seats can't punish Labor by voting teal. They can only punish Labor by voting Liberal. At one level, maybe this isn't as impactful a broken promise as Julia Gillard's broken promise not to have a carbon tax. Here, only a minority of taxpayers will end up getting hurt. But unlike Gillard's promise, the Prime Minister's Stage 3 tax cuts pledge was repeated over and over again.
My word is my bond.
People are entitled to have that certainty of the tax cuts that have been legislated, the certainty that comes through legislated tax changes, and we intend to fulfil that.
I can confirm that we haven't changed our position.
We have no change to our plans. Tax cuts will happen in July.
We haven't changed our position. I've said we haven't changed our position. We haven't changed our position on the Stage 3 tax cut.
Some of those commitments are as recent as Wednesday, this time last week. And unlike Gillard's broken promise, this broken promise wasn't forced on the Prime Minister by a hostile crossbench. This is a deliberate, premeditated broken promise that Labor did not need to do. So make no mistake, this will hurt the government. It should hurt the government, with anyone who values political integrity. And if it does turn out to be a one-term wonder, well, this was seen as the turning point, no less than the PM's epic failure, misjudgment over the Voice.